Pons.
Stealing the Minds of America is the name of her book, and it's a must for all truth seekers who vote. Janice, welcome to today's Issues.
Thank you, sir. It is such an honor and a pleasure to be with you gentlemen today.
Thank you, Janice.
Honor and pleasure
is ours.
I was going to say, I would hold that opinion till after the interview.
Well, Janice, thanks for being with us. Tell us a little bit about yourself before we get into this topic that you cover.
Yes, sir. Well, I am an African-American woman. I consider myself an American. My ethnic race is African-American. I'm a black American. That's what I choose to say. But I was born in Greensboro, North Carolina, an environment that was very racially charged when I was growing up, right in the midst of Jim Crow, and experienced much of that growing up. And now I live in Tulsa, Oklahoma. But so much that I experienced growing up in North Carolina, it was so very, very racially charged. And I was just taught certain things as a black person growing up, things such as you were never to trust white people, particularly Republicans, because Republicans were always out to get you. They would always take from you. I was told that as a black person, when I was a little girl, it was a mantra that I would hear my father say. He would always say, you need to always vote a straight Democratic ticket when you grow up, just straight Democratic ticket. And so I would just hear that, and of course what you heard your leaders, pastors, so-called civil rights leaders saying, people in the community, you just did as you were told. You had organizations, the NAACP, you had pastors, you had your family, you had your culture, your tradition, your experiences, telling you certain things as a black person growing up, particularly in the South. And so I was very excited about being able to vote, getting old enough to vote. My great-grandmother was a slave, so, you know, I was excited to vote because I could. She couldn't vote. People had shed their blood so I could vote. So I was excited about becoming old enough to vote, and so I always just voted a straight Democratic ticket, no matter what. I mean, that's what black people do. That's what we were told. That's what you do. And over a period of time, I proudly did that without asking any questions whatsoever. In 1988, my husband, I had been married a year. My husband, who's an awesome man of God, he came to me, and he said to me one day with a very concerned look on his face, he said, honey, there is no way that we can continue to vote a straight Democratic ticket. He said the man that we would automatically vote for in 1988 was Mike Dukakis. He said the man that we would automatically vote for, his beliefs, what he stands for, his platform, doesn't line up anywhere close to what we believe as people of faith, as people who have morals and values. It just doesn't line up. And I just said, you know, I was very concerned. I started getting scared. I mean, I literally felt scared. I knew that my belief system was being it was being invaded, and I had this feeling of fear that I was getting challenged with, that I was going to have to let go of something. He was just like, we can't do it. He says, we've been just duped. It just doesn't line up with what we believe. And I just said, well, honey, he's a Democrat. That's all that matters. And he said, well, no, honey, he's touting that he's a card-carrying member of the ACLU. And I said, well, what does that stand for? He said, American Civil Liberties Union. I said, oh, wow, honey, civil liberties, that's got to be something good for black people. Look at what we've gone through just in our lifetime, not to speak of what our great-grandparents and grandparents and even our parents have experienced. We've experienced Jim Crow ourselves. I mean, that's got to be something good. He said, okay, listen, all right, let's just do some reading and researching for ourselves. And let's not just take the word of what the Democrats or Democratic parties telling us and our family and so-called leaders. Let's just do some reading and research for ourselves. And that was the journey that we started in 1988, and we have been on that journey ever since. And I began to learn facts about my history that absolutely rocked my world, and I realized that my pattern of thinking had been captured and stolen by forces motivated by a specific agenda. And I realized that I did not know my political history. I realized that America had been lied to. Revisionists revisionism had lied to us, and specifically the black race had been lied to. And what I realized, what I walked away from the whole process realizing, was that if the black race has been lied to, America has been lied to. And these facts just rock my world. And so I haven't been the same since. And so I was so motivated and so changed by what I learned that I knew I had to write it. I was compelled to write. I was just put in a position where it had to be put in writing because I realized I'd been lied to, my mind had been stolen, and I knew that there were millions just like me.
What's the name of the book, and where can people get it?
Stealing the Minds of America, a must for all truth seekers who vote. Stealing the Minds of America, a must for all truth seekers who vote. And you may obtain the book by going to my website, www.stealingthemindsofamerica.com, www.stealingthemindsofamerica.com.
Let me ask her one. Excuse me for stepping on you there, Jim. You can step on me later.
Okay.
Janice L. Ponds, Ponds, is our guest. Janice L. Ponds, Ponds, is our guest. I got a question for you, though, Janice. And everything you just said, I can appreciate and I understand. But there has to be something, it would seem to me, it would be reasonable to say that there's something in the background of the Democrats' party connection to black Americans that make them so loyal. I mean, it can't all be. I mean, did they do some? Was it the civil rights movement of the '60s that President Johnson embraced? That the Democrats. I mean, you tell me there has to be some connection to the Democrat Party that historically that makes them so loyal.
Absolutely. Now, you're making a very good point, but let's go back. See, that's where people start, but you have to go back further. See, what I discovered that rocked my world was that the Republican Party, we have to go back. Just bear with me just a moment here, and this will make it give you
the floor is yours. You got 5 minutes till the break.
Okay, here we go. The Republican Party was started in 1854 as anti-slavery leaders broke away from the pro-slavery Democratic Party to establish a new political group to abolish slavery. I didn't know that. I was always told that the Democrats, that the Republicans were the ones who were against slaves. The Republican Party was started expressly in 1854 to abolish slavery. Abraham Lincoln was the first Republican president in 1860. All of the planks of his platform in that election in 1860 was about abolishing slavery. It was the Republican Party that allowed black Americans to participate in the political process subsequent to slavery, which resulted in hundreds of black men who were former slaves becoming congressmen and prominent political leaders. The Democratic Party didn't want these all of a sudden free 4 million former slaves who were going to be free. They were terrified at the thought of them being free. But it was the Republican Party who opened up their arms and allowed them to be a part of the political process. This is not my opinion. Just go do the research for yourself. It's there. It was a Democratic Party that spearheaded the Dred Scott decision of 1857 that delivered a Democratic Party-specific Supreme Court declaring that blacks were not even persons or citizens, but instead property of right or rights. Now, they didn't have any rights. Now, the Democratic Party started the Ku Klux Klan in 1866. Who were they? They were the terrorist wing of the Democratic Party, and their whole effort, their whole focus was to prevent African American leaders who were being elected to political office after slavery was abolished by the Republican Party. And what did they do? They terrorized both black and white Americans who had a Republican Party affiliation. They intimidated them to force them to not vote for the Republican Party. There were black congressmen during that period of time. PBS Pinchback, he was the governor of Louisiana. If you go back and see the congressmen, there were hundreds of black men who were former slaves and who were now congressmen and involved in the political process. If you go back and see and type in the New Orleans Massacre, it was when the Republican Convention was held July 30th of 1866, where Democrats stormed the floor of that convention and slaughtered the majority of them black people who were at the convention, slaughtered white people, and injured over 100 people. The Republican convention was invaded. Go back and do the history. Well, the Democrats started the KKK in 1866 to terrorize people from voting a straight Republican ticket. My mother's 94-year-old sister tells me today, she grew up in North Carolina, her very words to me, she said, Janice, they'd kill you if you voted a Republican ticket. They were forced to vote Democratic ticket. Now, people think that we didn't get our voting rights and our Civil Rights Act until 1964 and 65. The 15th Amendment gave us voting rights in 1870. And it was in 1876 when the Democratic Party took control again of Congress. They repealed over 24 civil rights laws that in essence put us right back in slavery, particularly with Jim Crow. The 15th Amendment, we had voting rights in 1870, and when we come back from the break, let's talk about what happened in 1964 and 65 to try to give us back the rights that we already had in 1870.
All right, you're listening to today's Issues on American Family Radio. Our guest is Janice L. Pons. The book, Stealing the Minds of America, a must for all truth seekers who vote. Tim?
Yeah, her website, Janice's website is stealingthemindsofamerica.com. We'll let Janice continue, pick it up right there in the mid-60s after the break. We appreciate you listening to the American Family Radio Network. We shall return momentarily.